A day in the life of our cave-dwelling ancestors. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a slow stroll into the world of our very distant relatives, the cavemen. Yes, those shaggy, grunting, surprisingly creative humans you've seen in cartoons, swinging clubs and chasing woolly mammoths. But here's the twist. Hunting was barely the main event. Believe it or not, most of their days were spent doing things that, honestly, make modern life look pretty boring. So dim the lights, get cozy, and let IS float back tens of thousands of years to see what a typical day in a cave really looked like. First, let's tackle the obvious. Cavemen needed food. Sure, hunting gets all the attention. Dramatic spears, stampeding animals, that one successful mammoth kill that makes them look heroic in movies. In reality, hunting only occupied about 10% of their day. The rest? Well, that's where it gets really interesting. While our ancestors were waiting for animals to wander past, they had to figure out how to stay alive, sane, and occasionally entertained. Imagine waking up in a damp cave, the early morning sun slanting through the rock crevices. You stretch, crack a few stiff joints, and check on the fire. Yes, fire was life, comfort, and security all in one, plus a great way to cook the occasional berry or leftover meat. But keeping a fire alive isn't exactly a hands-off hobby. Cavemen had to feed it, poke it, and guard it from animals or damp weather. Think of it like babysitting. Only the baby is fire, and failure means instant darkness. And then, of course, there's grooming. Cavemen weren't wearing deodorant or shampoo, but they had routines. Fossilized combs made from bone suggest they carefully tended their hair and beards. Nails got trimmed with sharp stones. And here's a fun one. They might have used natural pigments not just for art, but for body decoration. Evidence from cave sites shows red ochre smeared on skin. Maybe for ritual, maybe for style, maybe because why not look festive while waiting for dinner to wander by? Once the practicalities were handled, what did they do with the rest of the day? Archaeologists suggest a surprising amount of socializing. Cavemen were part of small groups, often extended family, and like any humans, they spent time negotiating, gossiping, squabbling, flirting, and generally figuring out how to live together without modern conveniences. Imagine being trapped in a poorly insulated apartment with a dozen people for months at a time, but you can't leave. You'd talk. A lot. Some of it might have been strategic. Hey, don't hog the mammoth meat again. And some just storytelling. Humans, even then, needed entertainment. Speaking of entertainment, here's where it gets slightly psychedelic. Evidence suggests that some Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens indulged in what modern scientists call visionary experiences. Basically, low-level hallucinogens. Certain cave sites contain traces of psychoactive plants and fungi. Mushrooms, herbs, and other substances might have been used in ritual or leisure. So, while one cave dweller sharpened tools or mended clothes, another could have been sitting cross-legged, staring at firelight, and having what we'd politely call trippy thoughts. And then, there was art. You've all seen the cave paintings. Bison, horses, abstract symbols, and yes, some of it downright pornographic. These images weren't just decoration. They were social statements, teaching tools, ritual guides, and probably a way to impress the group. Imagine being the first person ever to draw a penis on a wall and thinking, yes, this will be appreciated in 40,000 years. Some scholars even suggest these images were used during ceremonies or storytelling sessions, connecting the group and helping pass down knowledge. Tool making was another surprisingly time-consuming occupation. Flint knapping, bone shaping, and woodworking could occupy hours. Precision mattered. A dull spear could mean starvation. A chipped knife could make your life miserable. So while hunting only took 10% of the day, preparing and maintaining the tools to hunt was a full-time preoccupation. Crafting was part survival, part artistry. Food preparation itself could be slow. Early humans didn't just grill meat and call it lunch. They had to cut, dry, smoke, or ferment it. They processed nuts, seeds, and tubers. They experimented with herbs. Even salt and spices, if they were lucky, could elevate their meals from barely edible to surprisingly pleasant. Imagine sitting around a fire, carefully cracking nuts, while the rest of the group debates whether a particular root is poisonous. Not exactly survival of the fittest, more like survival of the most patient. Sex, of course, also filled a surprising chunk of their time. Anthropologists have reconstructed sexual behaviors from bone markers and wear patterns. Early humans weren't just reproducing, they were also reinforcing social bonds, practicing intimacy, and sometimes creating the occasional awkward cousin-level complication, because small groups lead to complicated family trees. Basically, when you aren't hunting or crafting, you're socializing, sleeping, or engaging in activities that would make modern family therapists wince. By the time the sun sank low, cavemen were ready for communal gatherings. The cave would glow from firelight, the smell of smoked meat in the air, and the sound of chatter, laughter, and occasional arguments bouncing off the stone walls. They'd tell stories, sing, or maybe participate in rituals we can only guess at. Some caves have evidence of ceremonial deposits, bones arranged in patterns, pigments smeared on walls, suggesting that our ancestors thought about life, death, and maybe even afterlife. And that, my friends, was a day in the life. Hunting? Yes. Dramatic? Yes, necessary. But mostly, cavemen were just trying to survive, stay sane, impress each other, and occasionally get a little weird with vision-inducing mushrooms or elaborate wall art. They were, in many ways, not so different from us, just with a slightly higher risk of stepping on a saber-toothed cat. Let's drift a little deeper into the caves and into the daily rhythm of prehistoric life. Because while we like to imagine our ancestors constantly chasing mammoths and dodging saber-toothed tigers, the truth is, most of the time, they were simply waiting for something to happen, waiting for the weather to shift, waiting for the next meal, waiting for a rock to chip the right way. Early human life was about endurance, not excitement, and patience, lots of patience, the kind that makes you appreciate sitting by a fire doing absolutely nothing. Now, let's talk about sleep. You might think cavemen just collapsed on the ground after a long day of surviving. But no, they had preferences. Archaeological digs show carefully arranged sleeping areas, sometimes layered with soft grasses or animal hides. Imagine that. Prehistoric interior design. Some slept near the cave entrance for fresh air and security. Others tucked themselves deeper inside to escape the cold. Families likely slept together, not for romance, but for warmth. The prehistoric version of body heat central heating. And the nights weren't always peaceful. The wilderness outside the cave came alive after dark. The howls, the rustling, the constant reminder that something bigger, hungrier, or toothier might be out there. That's why fire mattered so much. Beyond warmth, it was protection. The glow kept animals away. The smoke masked scents. The fire circle was the heartbeat of the community. Sitting around it, they'd stare into the flames, sharing stories that might have been part history, part fantasy. Probably the first bedtime stories ever told. Speaking of stories, let's talk about language. The ability to gossip might be humanity's greatest invention. Evidence suggests that early Homo sapiens had fully developed vocal abilities, which means they didn't just grunt and point, they talked. Maybe not like us, but enough to share warnings, teach skills, or complain about who burned the last piece of mammoth fat. Language gave structure to the chaos. It created leaders, storytellers, and, inevitably, arguments. And yes, there were politics, even in caves. Small groups meant constant negotiation. Who got the best meat? Who guarded the fire? Who was responsible for watching the kids while others scavenged? Leadership wasn't about crowns or titles. It was about respect, competence, and sometimes, intimidation. The strongest hunter might lead one day, but the smartest toolmaker might call the shots the next. Early humans were flexible like that. Power wasn't inherited yet, it was earned, or occasionally, just taken with a bigger club. One of the strangest and most beautiful things about early human life was how spiritual it became. Even before formal religion, there were rituals. Burials with flowers, painted skulls, deliberate offerings left in dark caves. These gestures hint at something deeply human, awareness of mortality. They knew life was short, fragile, unpredictable, so they made meaning out of it. Whether they were praying to spirits, ancestors, or the forces of nature, it was their way of saying, We exist. We matter. Please don't let the sky fall on us again. And it wasn't all gloom. Humor existed too. Maybe not stand-up comedy, but playfulness for sure. Anthropologists have found bones shaped into musical instruments. Think about that. Someone 40,000 years ago picked up a vulture bone and said, "This would sound cool if I blew into it." And just like that, music was born. Combine that with rhythmic drumming on hollow logs, the crackle of fire, and a few fermented berries, and you have the prehistoric version of a Friday night party. Children, by the way, weren't idle. They learned early. Kids practiced throwing pebbles, mimicked adults with miniature tools, and played games that probably doubled as survival training. Childhood was short. By their teens, most were contributing to the group's work. But even then, you can imagine the laughter, the teasing, the shared moments of lightness that broke up the monotony of existence. Humans, no matter how ancient, always found ways to make life bearable. And when things got tough, say, the weather turned or food ran short, they adapted. Contrary to the stereotype of mindless brutes, cavemen were resourceful. They mapped animal migrations. They remembered which plants healed and which ones didn't. They built temporary shelters when caves weren't available and learned to cooperate with neighboring groups when resources were scarce. That cooperation, that ability to share knowledge and form bonds, is what set us apart from other species. But of course there were darker sides too. Jealousy, competition, even violence. Some skeletons show signs of blunt trauma or weapon wounds. Early humans weren't angels. They fought, they killed, sometimes over territory, sometimes over mates. Life in small, tense communities was a fragile balance between collaboration and conflict. Still, even then, there was remorse, maybe even reconciliation. After all, a fight in a 20-person tribe doesn't end with blocking someone. It ends with awkwardly sitting across the fire from them for the rest of your life. As for art, it evolved. The earliest cave drawings weren't just animals. They began adding symbols, handprints, mysterious shapes. Some think these were early attempts to record time, to mark births or seasons. Others think they were just doodles, prehistoric boredom scratched into stone. Whatever the reason, art became identity. Those red ochre streaks, those charcoal outlines, they told stories long before words did. They were the original human expression saying, "I was here." So when we ask, what did cavemen actually do all day? The real answer isn't hunting or even surviving. It's existing, fully, curiously, creatively. They thought, they dreamed, they bonded. They laughed at stupid things, loved imperfectly, and worried about tomorrow. Not so different from us scrolling on our phones at midnight, wondering what life really means. Let's float over to something a bit more personal next. How they loved, mourned, and handled emotions in a world without language for them. Let's settle in again, maybe pull the blanket up a little, because now we're drifting into the more intimate side of early human life. Love, loss, affection, and whatever passed for emotional connection when your date night involved mammoth fat and firelight. It's easy to imagine prehistoric people as emotionless survivors, but bones and fossils tell a different story. They show care. Literal, physical care. Healed fractures, worn-down joints that would have required help, skeletons buried with tenderness. Someone nursed them, tended their wounds, made sure they weren't left behind. That means empathy existed, maybe even love, long before poetry or marriage rings. They might not have said "I love you," but they showed it by sharing food, warmth, and safety. In their world, that was everything. And yes, there was romance, or at least attraction. When you live in small groups, everyone knows everyone, and finding a partner wasn't exactly a swipe right situation. It was more like, you've known this person since birth, they're not directly related, hopefully, and they can make fire or throw a spear straight. Perfect match. Love was practical, and partnerships were built on survival. But despite the limited options, there's evidence they still sought connection. Shell beads, animal teeth necklaces, and carved figurines show that early humans cared about beauty, both wearing it and admiring it. And while we're being honest, sex wasn't just about reproduction. It played a social role too. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer tribes today, which can reflect ancient patterns, note that physical intimacy often helped smooth tensions, create alliances, and bond groups. For early humans, it was communication without words, a way to say, "I trust you," or "let's not fight today." So yes, cavemen were emotional creatures. Their expressions might have been fewer, but the feelings were all there: jealousy, longing, affection, grief. Speaking of grief, one of the most haunting archaeological discoveries comes from a cave in Iraq. There, a Neanderthal skeleton was found surrounded by pollen, traces of flowers laid carefully around the body. Whether that was an intentional burial ritual or just coincidence, it still whispers something profoundly human. They mourned. Death wasn't just the end of a body, it was the loss of presence, of familiarity, of warmth beside the fire. You can almost imagine them sitting silently, watching the smoke rise and wondering where that person went. Now, it wasn't all existential sadness and tender moments. Early human relationships had drama too, because of course they did. Rivalries, jealousy, unspoken rules, and probably more than a few messy love triangles in tight cave communities. Fossil evidence of violent injuries between males suggests competition for mates wasn't exactly gentle. You had to prove your worth, through skill, strength, or charisma. And let's be real, the first version of showing off was probably someone casually skinning a mammoth while pretending not to care who's watching. But family wasn't just nuclear, it was fluid. Children weren't only raised by parents, they were part of the group. "It takes a village" wasn't a saying, it was a survival mechanism. Everyone watched out for everyone's kids, because every small human represented the future of the tribe. And since life expectancy was short, maybe 30 if you were lucky, passing on knowledge fast mattered. Teaching, guiding, protecting, all signs that early humans had complex emotional systems, not just instincts. Let's float over to something softer: creativity. Because when you have time to survive, you eventually start thinking about expression. The Venus figurines, small statues of exaggerated female forms, are one of the earliest signs of this. They might have symbolized fertility, beauty, or simply fascination with the human body. Some scholars call them prehistoric erotica, others spiritual icons. Either way, they show curiosity about identity and form. Even in a harsh world, they found time to imagine. And then there's the question of faith. Did cavemen believe in gods? Not in the way we think. But they clearly sensed something beyond themselves. The way they buried their dead, arranged stones, or painted animals with reverence suggests they felt awe, a connection to nature, to cycles, to something unseen. Maybe they didn't name their deities, but they respected the mysteries. Thunder, lightning, the returning sun. These weren't just weather patterns. They were omens, stories, cosmic rhythms. Now, a fun side note, or slightly ridiculous, depending on your perspective. Evidence hints that some early humans engaged in ritualistic or trance-like states. Yes, those mushroom-induced visions weren't random. Certain plant and fungus traces found in cave sites align with shamanic activity. Picture a self-appointed spiritual leader painted in ochre, sitting in the smoky half-light, eyes wide from natural hallucinogens, claiming to speak with the spirits of the hunt. And everyone else probably nodded respectfully, partly believing, partly thinking, "Here he goes again." That's the funny thing. Humans, even then, had social roles. Hunters, gatherers, toolmakers, storytellers, maybe even spiritual guides. Each contributed differently. Cooperation was essential, but so was individuality. They celebrated the clever, admired the strong, and tolerated the eccentric, because every group needed its characters. You could almost say the first version of society was a very small, very smoky sitcom. And through all of it, the love, the loss, the laughter, they evolved. Slowly. Every small adaptation, every clever tool, every new song hummed around a fire brought them closer to us. It's comforting in a strange way. When you look at your phone today or complain about slow Wi-Fi, you're carrying the same restlessness that made your ancestors draw on cave walls. That quiet human need to do more than survive, to create, to connect, to leave a mark. So what did cavemen actually do all day? The short answer still holds. Everything that made them human, and not much different from what we do now. They worked, they rested, they dreamed, they loved, and they tried to make sense of it all. Let's wander next into how they handled the world around them, their fears, their adaptability, and what finally pushed them to leave those caves behind. Let's wander deeper now, out of the caves, into the wild world that shaped everything our ancestors became. Because while we've explored their daily lives, emotions, and rituals, there's still one question left unlit by the campfire. What were they afraid of? Fear, after all, was their oldest teacher. It kept them alive. It sharpened their senses. It made them invent weapons, shelters, and strategies. And it never really went away. It just changed shape over the centuries. In the prehistoric night, fear wasn't abstract. It had eyes. It growled. It lurked. Every sound could mean danger. A predator creeping close, a rival tribe approaching, or the wind shifting before a storm. Firelight was their only defense against the darkness, both physical and spiritual. It's why they kept it burning all night, even when wood was scarce. The flame wasn't just warmth. It was protection, hope, and perhaps the first form of faith. Imagine a night 30,000 years ago. The moon is hidden, the air is wet, and somewhere out in the black, something moves. The group huddles tighter. Every heart beats faster. That silence before the roar, before the scream. That's where humanity learned vigilance, because one careless moment meant death. They feared nature, yes, but they also learned from it. Rain taught them patience. Drought taught them foresight. The wind told them where prey might be hiding. Over time, they began to predict the moods of the earth like you'd read the expressions of a friend. That bond with nature, half respect, half terror, became the foundation of human intelligence. You had to understand what could kill you to survive it. And while they feared beasts, they soon discovered their greatest enemy wore the same skin as theirs. Tribal conflict began early. Maybe it was over territory, food, or revenge, or maybe just fear of the unknown. Different often meant dangerous. Skulls with healed war wounds, fractured ribs, and embedded arrowheads tell us prehistoric warfare wasn't rare. Humans were clever predators, and sometimes their prey was each other. But even in violence there was evolution. They learned to plan, to ambush, to outthink the enemy. Every fight was a lesson in survival strategy. Every victory or loss passed through generations as stories told by firelight. And that's how humanity, as oldest teacher, fear, became the seed of something else. Wisdom. Let's float over now to a gentler thought, adaptability, because no other creature in history changed as skillfully as humans did. The Ice Age came, forests froze, herds vanished, yet they endured. They learned to make warmer clothes, build better shelters, store food, and travel long distances. When rivers dried, they moved. When predators grew stronger, they formed alliances. When the world changed, they changed faster. That adaptability wasn't just physical, it was emotional. They learned to handle loss, to accept uncertainty, to rebuild after disaster. You can almost see them, sitting around the embers of a burnt camp, quietly planning the next move. That ability to start again, to not give up, that was humanity's most powerful survival tool. And it came with a strange new emotion, curiosity. Why does the sun disappear and return? Where do animals go when the snow falls? What lies beyond the next mountain? Curiosity pulled them forward, across continents. It pushed them to invent, to explore, to wonder. That's when humans truly stopped being mere survivors and started becoming thinkers. Let's pause and look at something incredible. The migration. Tens of thousands of years ago, small groups began leaving Africa, the birthplace of us all. They didn't know what lay ahead, only that something better might exist beyond the horizon. Some walked through deserts, others crossed frozen lands. They followed stars, rivers, and instincts. Their journey reshaped the world, and every one of us carries traces of that courage in our DNA. Migration wasn't a single event. It was an endless ripple, people moving, settling, blending. Wherever they went, they left behind tools, paintings, and children. New cultures sprouted, shaped by the land. Those who lived near the coasts became fishermen. Those in mountains became hunters of the heights. Every landscape carved its own version of humanity. And yet, across all those divides, distance, language, and custom, something remained constant: community, the need to belong. Whether in caves or tents or huts, humans gathered. They laughed, shared food, and told stories. Storytelling might have been their greatest invention, more powerful than fire, more lasting than tools. Through stories they remembered. They taught lessons, passed warnings, kept history alive, and maybe that's where we come in. Because what we're doing now, talking about them, remembering them, it's part of that same chain. They spoke around fires. We speak through screens. The medium changed. The instinct didn't. Now let's touch the edge of their next great leap, the dawn of civilization. The moment when survival turned into society. When humans began planting instead of chasing. When they started to own the land instead of merely passing through it. It began quietly, near river valleys, the Tigris, the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow River. Seeds sprouted, herds were tamed, and life found rhythm. But the cost of comfort was control. Walls appeared, rules formed, hierarchies were born. And for the first time, humanity had to balance freedom with order. That transition, from hunter to farmer, from wanderer to builder, changed everything. It ended one age and began another. But beneath the soil and stone, the instincts of the caveman still pulsed. Curiosity, fear, love, survival. The same raw heartbeat of humanity, echoing across time. And so the story of what cavemen did all day isn't really about bones and tools. It's about us. Because we still do it. We still adapt, fight, dream, love, and fear. We just do it with different tools and bigger fires. Next, let S step into that turning point. When humans left behind their caves forever and started building the first civilizations. A world of kings, temples, and empires, all born from the ashes of the Stone Age. Let's drift now out of the caves for good. The air feels warmer. The ground feels steadier. Something is changing in the rhythm of life. The endless chase of the hunter-gatherer begins to slow down, replaced by the steady heartbeat of villages, the sound of grain grinding, water splashing, and people arguing over whose goat ate whose barley again. Civilization didn't begin with kings or crowns. It began with boredom. When you're not running from predators every other day, your brain suddenly has free time to think. What if we just planted this seed instead of eating it? One genius probably mumbled. And when it worked, humanity's most revolutionary idea sprouted. Farming. Of course, farming wasn't glamorous. You traded freedom for fences. The nomad sky turned into a roof of thatch. But the rewards were huge. Food security, population growth, and eventually, power. People began settling near rivers because water meant life. The Nile, the Euphrates, the Indus, these weren't just rivers. They were civilization's first lifelines. Let us float for a moment to Mesopotamia, that muddy cradle of history where it all began. Imagine a wide brown river snaking through dust, dotted with small huts and fields. Here people learned to measure time by the flood, to write down debts in wet clay, and to build temples taller than their gods probably asked for. The Sumerians invented writing, not for poetry, but for taxes, because apparently humans were already obsessed with receipts 5,000 years ago. Their world was small but organized. They worshipped the weather, feared demons, and argued over irrigation rights. Kings appeared, calling themselves chosen by the gods, and everyone nodded along, probably because disagreeing meant being thrown off a ziggurat. Over in Egypt, the same thing was happening, but with better architecture. The Nile flooded so predictably that it became a cosmic calendar. The pharaohs ruled like divine CEOs, managing grain and constructing the world's most unnecessary tombs. Imagine the audacity, spending decades building a pyramid just to be buried with a bunch of gold and stale bread. But there was logic to it. The Egyptians believed in continuity, that death was just another kind of life. The pyramids weren't monuments to power. They were insurance policies for eternity. And though the pharaohs' names changed, the idea of divine authority stuck. The notion that leaders were something more than human. A comforting lie humanity would never quite outgrow. Now, across the desert sands, another story was unfolding. The Indus Valley civilization. They didn't bother much with kings or wars. They were clean freaks with plumbing. Real functioning plumbing. Drains, public baths, grid systems. The people of Mohenjo-Daro were living in what could easily pass for a Bronze Age suburb. No flashy monuments, no massive armies, just quiet order, which of course is why we barely remember them. History prefers drama. Meanwhile, in China's Yellow River Basin, the ancestors of dynasties were stirring. They learned to farm millet, build wooden houses, and worship ancestors. Because if anyone was going to invent filial piety, that endless respect for one's elders, it was the Chinese. Their early societies laid the foundation for a worldview that would outlast empires, harmony, hierarchy, and the idea that family comes before all else. But here's the twist. As humans built walls, they built differences. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and suddenly, inequality was born. Someone had to own the fields, someone had to work them, and someone had to decide who got what. So we created hierarchy. Priests, warriors, merchants, peasants. Every new system needed someone at the top and plenty of people at the bottom. Civilization was progress, yes, but it also invented class struggle long before Marx ever had a beard to stroke. Let's pause for a sleepy chuckle here. Cavemen never argued about taxes or zoning laws. They didn't build kingdoms. They didn't have lawyers. Progress, as it turned out, was exhausting. Still, civilization gave humanity something priceless: time to think. Once food and shelter were secure, people began asking bigger questions. Where do we come from? Why does the sun rise? What happens after death? Religion evolved from superstition into structure. Gods became personalities, myths became laws. Temples replaced caves as centers of community. Priests replaced shamans as middlemen between man and the mysterious. And then came art, glorious and unnecessary. People carved, painted, sang, and told stories not for survival, but for meaning. They built statues of gods with lion heads, drew chariots on pottery, and decorated everything from cups to coffins. Because even in the ancient world, aesthetics mattered. Let's drift west for a moment, to the Aegean Sea. Small island cultures like the Minoans and Mycenaeans began shaping myths that would one day become Greek legends. These were people who loved the sea, the sun, and apparently, complicated family drama involving gods and mortals. They traded, wrote in strange scripts, and built palaces filled with frescoes. Proof that even early humans wanted their homes to look like art galleries. But with civilization also came anxiety, new fears, new diseases, new wars. Once you had something to lose, life got stressful. Droughts could starve you. Invaders could ruin you. Leaders could tax you to death, or literally just kill you. The fragile peace of early settlements often collapsed, leaving behind ruins, bones, and burned clay tablets, humanity's first receipts of failure. Still, the pattern kept repeating: build, collapse, rebuild, like an eternal heartbeat, pushing humanity forward. Because even when everything burned, people didn't stop. They found new rivers, new lands, new gods. They adapted, again. And somewhere in that rhythm, farming, trading, building, believing, the caveman truly vanished. Not because he disappeared, but because he evolved. His instincts remained, just polished with civilization's gloss. He still wanted food, shelter, belonging, and meaning. He just wanted them in fancier packaging. So the next time someone imagines cavemen as dumb brutes, remember, those people built the blueprint of humanity. They were the first to love, to fear, to wonder, to build. And every city, every skyscraper, every civilization that followed was just an echo of their first fires in the dark. Let us drift now into the final stretch, the part where humanity looks back at everything it has built, from caves to kingdoms, and wonders if maybe, just maybe, the old way was better after all. Let's take a slow breath here. Civilization has been built, the fires have turned into cities, and the soft sound of the river has become the hum of humanity. But if you listen carefully, beneath the stone, beneath the noise, you can still hear it. The echo of the cave, the heartbeat of the hunter, the original rhythm of life that civilization never managed to silence. Because here's the truth. For all our progress, we never really stopped being cavemen. We just changed our tools and gave them Wi-Fi. Modern humans, sitting under fluorescent lights, sipping coffee, scrolling endlessly, are still wired like their ancestors crouched beside a flickering fire. The same instincts guide us. The same desires drive us. The same fears whisper in the dark. We crave warmth, safety, connection, meaning. We hoard comfort, chase status, and feel lost without a tribe. The only difference is that our tribes now have usernames. Let's float over to an image. A Neanderthal sharpening his stone spear beside the fire. His children sleep nearby. He's tired, hungry, and a little anxious about tomorrow's hunt. Now picture you, sitting in bed, phone in hand, worried about tomorrow's meeting, or maybe that email you haven't answered. Congratulations. You've both achieved the same emotional experience, just with different background music. Civilization may have built towers and satellites, but emotionally, we never left the cave. We still look for firelight, only now it glows from our screens. We still listen to stories before sleep, only now they come from podcasts and videos, not from the elder by the fire. That's the strange beauty of it. For all the centuries of change, the essence of being human hasn't evolved as much as we think. We are still creatures of habit, ritual, and imagination. We still tell stories to make sense of chaos. We still draw lines in the sand between us and them. And when we're scared, lonely, or curious, we still look up at the night sky and wonder if something bigger is watching. But somewhere along the way, civilization began to rewrite its own myths. It told us that progress means leaving the old behind, that the wild, instinctive, untamed part of ourselves is primitive, something to outgrow. So we paved it over. We traded the forest for cities, the hunt for work, the shaman for the therapist. We built routines that keep us busy and distracted. We became civilized but not necessarily content, because the caveman inside still knocks sometimes. He shows up in the moments you feel restless for no reason. In the craving to travel, to touch nature, to watch a fire crackle. In the sudden urge to just walk, no destination, no goal, just to move. That's him, the old human, the one who lived simply but fully, whose world was smaller but whose senses were sharper. We've gained a lot since then, medicine, art, language, order, but we've also lost the silence. Our ancestors had quiet nights where stars filled the sky like stories. They knew the shape of every tree and the scent of every season. They saw death up close, but they also knew how to sit still and just exist. In contrast, modern life often feels like a race without a finish line. We run faster, but toward what? We've built machines to save time, and yet we're always out of it. We've connected the entire planet, but feel more isolated than ever. Maybe the cavemen, in their slow, raw existence, knew something we've forgotten. That life isn't meant to be efficient. It's meant to be experienced. They didn't count hours. They counted sunsets. They didn't dream of luxury. They dreamed of safety, warmth, and maybe an easier hunt tomorrow. And somehow that gave their lives meaning. Let's float to another quiet image. A woman painting on a cave wall. Her fingers leave marks of red and black, forming animals that seem to move under the flicker of the fire. She's not doing it for money or fame or followers. She's doing it because she has to, because something in her wants to leave a trace, a sign that she existed, that she saw beauty, that she mattered. And that, right there, is the thread connecting her to us. Every poem, every photograph, every TikTok dance, it's the same instinct. The human need to say, I was here, I felt this, I mattered. Civilization didn't erase that instinct, it amplified it. But the problem is we now measure it by numbers, likes, views, wealth, instead of presence. The caveman made art to feel alive. We make it to prove we are. Somewhere along the way, the meaning shifted, but maybe the secret isn't to go back, it's to remember. to carry that old, earthy wisdom into the modern world, to live a little slower, to eat when hungry, sleep when tired, laugh when possible, and tell stories by whatever firelight we find. Because despite the skyscrapers, the algorithms, and the endless rush, humanity still belongs to the same lineage. Barefoot dreamers staring at the stars, trying to understand why we're here. So, what did cavemen actually do all day? They survived. They loved. They feared. They made art. Exactly what we still do, just with better shoes. Let us drift now to the closing chapter of our sleepy journey, where we look at the final poetic truth of it all, that for every invention and every civilization, the soul of humanity still sits quietly beside the fire, waiting for the night to end. Let's settle down one last time. The night outside is calm again, the kind of silence where time feels slower, where the air itself seems to listen. The firelight, whether it's from an ancient cave or a modern screen, flickers softly, reminding us that the story isn't really about then or now. It's about us, about what it means to be human, no matter the century. When we think of the first humans, we imagine something distant, half-beasts grunting at the sky. But if you strip away the centuries, the language, the clothing, you find someone very familiar. Someone who worried about food, family, shelter, and love. Someone who felt joy when their child laughed and grief when they didn't wake up the next morning. Someone who looked at the stars and wondered if there was more to all this. Same questions, same ache, different tools. We talk about evolution as if it made us better, but maybe it just made us louder. The caveman's world was brutal, yes, but it was also honest. When they were hungry, they ate. When they were tired, they slept. When they were scared, they faced it or fled. Simple equations. No calendars, no emails, no pretending. Life was clear because it had to be. Civilization added layers, comfort, art, philosophy, but also confusion. We started asking, how much is enough? What's the right path? Who decides? We created answers and called them systems, religion, politics, economics. But beneath them, the same raw instincts still hum quietly, like an old melody everyone knows but no one remembers learning. Let's imagine for a moment that you could bring a Neanderthal into today's world. Hand him a pair of jeans, teach him to drive, give him a smartphone. He'd probably figure it out faster than we'd expect. Not because he's some noble savage, but because deep down, his brain works like ours. The difference is that his world was slower, and ours is loud. He'd probably look at our endless busyness, our glowing screens, our constant worry about what's next, and ask the question we're too busy to face. Why? That's the heart of it, isn't it? For all our progress, we rarely sit in stillness anymore. We fill silence because it scares us. We chase goals because stillness feels like failure. The caveman didn't have that problem. He didn't have time for existential dread. His meaning was immediate. Stay alive. Keep your people safe. Maybe that's what made his world simpler. Not easier, but simpler. Let's float over to another fire now. Somewhere on the steppe, maybe 40,000 years ago. The group has eaten. The children are asleep. The adults sit in a loose circle. Someone hums softly. Another tells a story about the spirits of the mountains. The flames rise, crackle, and fade. For a moment, everything feels suspended. Time, space, thought. Just warmth and breathing, and the comfort of not being alone. Now tell me that it's not the same feeling you get when you're sitting with friends or listening to music, or even right now, drifting in a quiet story before bed. It's the same flame, it's just changed shape. The modern fire burns inside wires and glass, but it still draws us in. We stare into it, just like they did, searching for connection, for meaning, for a sense of warmth in a cold universe. The glow has changed, the need hasn't. And maybe that's the quiet lesson buried under all this history, that progress didn't erase our past. It just gave it new costumes. We still hunt, only now it's for money, fame, validation. We still build tribes, only now they exist online. We still worship, only our gods have become brands, ideologies, or people with microphones. Different tools, Same instincts. Sometimes I wonder what those first humans would think if they saw us now. Would they be proud, confused, amused? Maybe they'd look at our cities glowing like stars and think we finally caught the fire of heaven. Or maybe they'd tilt their heads and say, "You've made the light too bright. You can't see the sky anymore." Because in the end, their world was smaller but somehow grander. Every sunrise was a miracle. Every meal was victory. Every life was brief but full. They didn't have history books to tell them they mattered. They just did. And here we are, their distant descendants, trying to remember what they already knew. That existence itself is enough. That to be alive, to breathe, to love, to share warmth, those are the real achievements. Everything else is decoration. So tonight, as the story slows, imagine that you're sitting beside them. The ancient fire is burning low. Someone hums quietly, the kind of tune that doesn't need words. You can smell the smoke, hear the crackle. And as the stars watch from above, you realize you've been here before. Maybe not in this body, not in this time, but in the same spirit. Because the story of humanity isn't written in stone or steel. It's written in light and warmth, in the need to keep the dark at bay. So if you ever feel small, remember, you are the result of a million fires that refuse to go out. Every fear faced, every story told, every act of survival, it all led here, to you, the newest link in a chain stretching back to the first spark in a cave. And that's the quiet miracle, isn't it? That even after all these ages, we still sit beside the same fire, searching for the same peace, whispering the same questions to the night. Now the flames fade, and the smoke drifts upward. The fire becomes embers. The story becomes silence. And somewhere, maybe in your heart, that ancient warmth still glows. Because once upon a time, humanity learned to make light out of darkness. And we never stopped. Let's float over to one of my favorite misconceptions. That cavemen spent every waking hour wrestling mammoths and sharpening spears. In reality, that kind of thing happened maybe a few times a month, and it usually ended with someone getting trampled, bitten, or forgotten somewhere behind a boulder. Most of the time, early humans were doing something a lot less dramatic. Existing. Picture a Neanderthal morning. The sun slips through a rock overhang. The air smells like smoke and old fur. A group stirs around a fading fire, half asleep, half hungry. Someone grunts, not out of anger, just to say, "I'm awake." Someone else pokes the embers, tosses in dry moss, and watches sparks fly. This, believe it or not, was most of the day's excitement. Contrary to our modern need for constant stimulation, prehistoric life was slow. There were no TikToks to scroll, no bosses to please, no notifications, unless you count the occasional mosquito. Cavemen didn't measure productivity, they measured survival, and that often meant doing as little as possible to conserve energy. After a small breakfast, probably roasted roots or leftover meat if they were lucky, the tribe would scatter. Some gathered berries, some looked for edible mushrooms, and some just lounged. Yes, literal prehistoric lounging. Anthropologists have found wear patterns on ancient camp floors, showing people sat in the same cozy spots for hours. Think of it as the original cave couch. And the conversations? Probably not that different from ours. Where's the good fruit today? Did you hear that thunder last night? Or maybe, don't touch that mushroom, it made Og see the gods again. Speaking of mushrooms, let's talk about that. Psychedelic plants and fungi weren't rare, and our ancestors didn't exactly have a pharmacology department to warn them. Many archaeologists believe early humans experimented constantly. Some of those mysterious cave art patterns, the swirling dots, the stretched figures, the bizarre hybrids of human and beast, might not have been random. They might have been visions, drawn by someone on the world's first trip. Imagine a cold night, the fire crackling. The group gathers, eyes wide, as one of them, probably the artist of the tribe, starts painting on the walls with a mix of crushed minerals and spit. He's not doing it for likes. He's doing it because the lines mean something. Maybe it's a story, a ritual, a memory. Maybe it's just the prehistoric version of doodling when you're bored. Either way, that's where some of humanity's first creativity sparked. Not in battle, but in boredom. And then there was the other favorite pastime, social bonding, which, yes, included sex, but not in the wild Hollywood way. It was messy, complicated, and often part of ritual or status. Some tribes paired off, others didn't bother keeping track. In small groups where everyone depended on everyone else, exclusivity wasn't much of a thing. The concept of jealousy probably hadn't evolved yet. Lucky them. There's also growing evidence that cavemen were surprisingly domestic. Women didn't just gather, they crafted tools, processed hides, and kept intricate knowledge of local plants. Men didn't just hunt, they helped raise kids, fix shelters, and occasionally showed off with a good story around the fire, which might explain why storytelling became such a big deal. Let's not forget music. That's right. Cavemen had instruments. The oldest known flute, carved from a vulture bone, dates back over 40,000 years. It even has finger holes, meaning someone knew what a note was before anyone knew what civilization meant. Picture that, a small fire-lit circle, someone humming softly through a bone flute, the sound echoing off the walls. That's not a scene from a fantasy movie. That's human history. Evenings were the most social time. After the chores were done, the fire was everything. It was warmth, light, and entertainment rolled into one. People told stories, not to pass time, but to preserve knowledge. A good story about a hunt gone wrong wasn't just funny. It taught the next generation what not to do. Some stories were mythic, others cautionary. It's possible that around those fires, language itself evolved, shaped by rhythm, repetition, and laughter. But of course, life wasn't all gentle vibes and art sessions. There were constant irritations, fleas, infections, cold winds, stomach problems. If someone got sick, the group had to decide whether to wait it out or move on. Compassion existed, but it was balanced with realism. Archaeological finds show that many injured or disabled individuals lived long lives, meaning their tribes cared for them. That small, quiet act of kindness says more about human nature than any battle ever could. And here's the thing about cavemen. They weren't stupid. They had larger brains than we do, and they used them. Not to invent smartphones, but to read weather, track seasons, recognize animal behavior, and navigate social tension in a world with no written rules. Every day was an experiment in intuition. So, what did cavemen actually do all day when they weren't hunting? They lived in the most human sense possible. They gathered, played, argued, made love, told stories, and stared into the flames. They tried to understand their world and, maybe without meaning to, built the foundations of ours. Let's float a little closer now, into the heart of their personal lives. Because for all the talk about survival, fire, and mammoths, the truth is, most of prehistoric life was about each other. The relationships, the quiet alliances, the petty rivalries, the fleeting moments of tenderness that somehow made the freezing nights feel less endless. If you strip away the caves and the furs, humans have always been hopelessly emotional creatures. Even in the Stone Age, someone was falling in love, someone else was jealous, and someone was pretending not to care. Archaeologists can't exactly dig up feelings, but they've found hints everywhere. Fossilized skeletons found carefully positioned, heads resting together, hands almost touching. Not random, not practical. These were moments of affection preserved in dirt. The tenderness is haunting. Even when you've been dead for 40,000 years, you can still look loved. And love back then wasn't candlelight and poetry. It was survival with a side of attachment. You chose a partner not because they had good hair, but because they could keep the fire going or spot mushrooms that wouldn't kill you. And yet, amid all that pragmatism, there were signs of something deeper. Partners buried together, children surrounded by trinkets. That's care. That's emotion. Of course, human love has never been without drama. Anthropologists have found evidence suggesting that Neanderthals and early modern humans sometimes lived in mixed groups. And, well, things got complicated. Genetic traces show interbreeding between species. So yes, at some point, a Homo sapiens probably looked across the fire at a Neanderthal and thought, close enough. But let's not judge too harshly. The dating pool was pretty limited. Family, though, wasn't always about romance. It was about the group, the old and the young living side by side. Grandparents mattered, They held the stories, the herbal recipes, the memory of which plants healed and which made you see gods. Children, meanwhile, were the tribe's investment in the future. Their laughter, high, wild, unfiltered, might have been the only real music in a world without instruments. Imagine a mother teaching her child to shape clay or press handprints onto cave walls. Those marks, small, imperfect, strangely human, are some of the earliest signatures in existence. They said, "I was here." And thousands of years later, they still whisper the same message through the dark. I mattered. Now, not everything was idyllic. Resources were scarce, and humans being humans, someone always wanted more. Disputes probably broke out. Over food, over mates, maybe even over sleeping spots near the warmest part of the cave. Conflict was inevitable. But without cities, kings, or armies, arguments had to be solved face to face. Sometimes with words, sometimes with rocks, and sometimes with someone storming off dramatically into the woods. Yet, most of the time, they worked it out. Because survival depended on cooperation. Holding grudges was a luxury you couldn't afford when wolves were watching from the tree line. So forgiveness, or at least tolerance, became a social instinct. And then, there were the elders. The ones who survived enough winters to grow gray. In many ways, they were the first philosophers. They'd seen the stars shift, the ice move, the herds vanish and return. They must have sat there by the fire, watching the younger ones chase each other around, and thought, nothing ever really changes. When one of them died, the loss echoed. Sometimes they were buried with objects of comfort, a shell necklace, a stone tool, a handful of red ochre dusted like a blessing. That ritual wasn't just about honoring the dead. It was about reassuring the living. That death wasn't chaos, that it fit somewhere in the story of life. There's also something beautifully ironic in all of this. For centuries, people painted cavemen as brutes. Dirty, violent, emotionless. But every scrap of evidence tells us the opposite. They cared, they decorated, they mourned. They made things that had no purpose except to be beautiful, and that means they dreamed. Their dreams were probably simple: a good hunt, a healthy child, a warm place to sleep. But maybe sometimes someone dreamed bigger, about where the sun went, or what lay beyond the hills. And that wondering, that endless curiosity, is what built us. We also shouldn't forget how playful they could be. Children's footprints found in caves show zigzagging trails, jumps, skips, like a prehistoric game of tag. Adults probably laughed watching them. Someone might have carved a small figure just to make a baby smile. That tenderness, so old and so ordinary, might be the most human thing of all. As night fell, couples might curl together, sharing warmth beneath furs that smelled faintly of smoke and earth. The air thick with the scent of ash, animal fat, and quiet breath. No words, just the hum of life, the kind of silence that feels like safety. It's humbling to realize that for nearly 2 million years, this was human life. No kingdoms, no wealth, just tribes, loving, arguing, building, breaking, and starting over. Their emotions were the blueprint for ours. The way they held hands, the way they painted walls, the way they buried their dead, all of it echoes inside us still. If you strip away the noise of our modern world, you'll find them there, under the static. Not that different. Just older, colder, and slightly hairier versions of us, living, laughing, and wondering what the stars were made of. Let's drift gently into the last stretch of our journey, where the fire burns low, the shadows stretch long, and the story slows to a quiet hum. Here, the past and present fold together, and we can see the long thread of humanity winding from caves to cities, from flint knives to smartphones, from whispered stories to YouTube videos like this one. The first humans lived in the cold, smelled of smoke and earth, and depended on one another in ways we can barely imagine. Every day was immediate. Every hunt, every meal, every interaction mattered in ways that weren't measured by profit or status, but by survival, connection, and the quiet understanding that your life was entwined with everyone else's. They woke, they worked, they loved, and they slept. And in that cycle, they built something far more enduring than stone walls or metal tools: the human spirit. We tend to forget this. We spend hours worrying about things that rarely affect our well-being. Deadlines, traffic, emails, all tiny echoes of the real concerns our ancestors faced. But in that simplicity, in that rawness, there was clarity. Survival dictated cooperation, and cooperation dictated empathy. Art and ritual emerged naturally, because humans needed beauty and meaning just as much as food. Every cave painting, every carefully placed shell, every whisper of a story around the fire was a declaration. We exist, and we matter. And isn't that what we're still doing today? We've traded caves for apartments, mammoths for markets, and spears for screens. But our instincts remain the same. We seek warmth and safety. We crave connection. We create stories to explain our world. We make art, even when no one will see it. We dream and we fail and we laugh and we mourn. The tools have changed, but the human heart has not. Take a moment to picture that fire one last time. Not the literal one, but the metaphorical. It flickers in the caves, in the villages, in the cities. It lives in every child drawing on walls, in every elder telling a story, in every human quietly staring at the stars, asking the same questions as their ancestors. That fire is curiosity, imagination, and empathy. That fire is why we persist, why we create, and why we remember. We carry echoes of the cavemen everywhere, in the instinct to gather with friends, to nurture children, to celebrate milestones, to pause and observe the world around us. Civilization may have reshaped our days, but it hasn't changed the essence of being human. And if we listen closely, if we quiet our minds enough, we can feel it. The same heartbeat that once pulsed beside flickering flames in dark caves. And so the story ends where it began. By the fire, in the quiet, with people living, loving, wondering. Life moves forward, always faster than we expect, but the core of our humanity remains timeless. The caveman is not gone. He is here, in us, in every choice, in every act of care, in every story we pass along. As you settle in, maybe dim the lights and think of that fire. Feel the warmth, the continuity, the unbroken chain of existence stretching from those earliest humans to you. And remember, every day, every story, every connection is a flicker in the vast, quiet blaze of humanity. So tonight, as the embers fade and the world outside your window drifts into sleep, know this: we are the inheritors of countless fires. We are the living testament to curiosity, courage, and care. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the weight of civilization and the noise of modern life, the caveman still sits quietly beside the flame, smiling, whispering, and reminding us what it truly means to be human. Ever wondered what cavemen did when they weren't hunting mammoths? It turns out hunting was only a small part of daily life. Most of their time was spent in ways surprisingly familiar to us today. Gathering food, playing, crafting, telling stories, making art, and bonding with their tribes. From quiet mornings beside flickering fires to evenings spent painting mysterious cave art or experimenting with early rituals and psychedelic mushrooms, prehistoric humans lived fully in the moment. They laughed, argued, fell in love, and mourned their dead, all while navigating the harsh but strangely beautiful world around them. This video explores the small, intimate details of prehistoric life, how families and social bonds kept communities alive, early human creativity, from cave art to music, the humor, play, and rituals that made life meaningful, how prehistoric humans thought about death, the stars, and the mysteries of existence. We trace the line from the first humans' daily lives to our own, showing that despite technology and civilization, the essence of being human, curiosity, creativity, connection, and the quiet search for meaning, has remained the same for tens of thousands of years. Settle in, let the firelight of the story warm your imagination, and drift alongside the earliest humans as we explore the gentle, everyday rhythm of their lives.